different parts of their body, who may not be able to walk, may not be able to communicate, may not be able to perform functions that the rest of us who are able-bodied take for granted. And the number of people who are disabled is not something that's becoming less. It's something that's becoming more, because people are living longer and they're living with illnesses longer. And not only that, but many of us, as we grow older, become physically disabled, end up using wheelchairs or not being able to perform what we normally take for granted, our bodily functions. Our society recognizes the right of disabled people not to be discriminated against. In the Human Rights Code, there's a specific prohibition against discrimination on the basis of physical disability and on the basis of illness. But disabilities can take many different forms. I want to talk about physical disabilities. The formal right of disabled people means nothing if it's not made to create a situation where physically disabled people can be independent, where physically disabled people can earn a living, where physically disabled people can feel at home in their apartments, where physically disabled people can travel without hindrance. The idea behind banning discrimination on the basis of physical disability is to give universal accessibility to jobs, to homes, and to transportation, so the disabled people can fit into society as much as possible, so that people who have a physical handicap will not be discriminated against. Unfortunately, the formal equality many, many times does not correlate to substantive and meaningful equality. For example, there are quotas for Ontario government and other public institutions and government ministries to enable a certain small percentage of people at different levels of being hired to be physically disabled, to reserve those places for physically disabled. But unfortunately, the government has not developed institutions and schools to train physically disabled people, so that in fact, especially at the higher echelons, physically disabled people are highly underrepresented. The government is also committed to provide universal accessibility in housing to disabled people. But I can tell you that doesn't happen. I have had as a client a woman who had no legs and who raised 2 children, who loved and ended up beautiful children. And she had no legs, and she lived in public housing. And she fought for years to have a sink that could be a little lower so she could reach it. She fought for years to have a washroom where her wheelchair could go in through the door in public housing for years and years. And there was a bureaucracy that prevented that from happening to a woman who did not have any legs and somehow managed to raise 2 children. Physical access to housing means more than having a piece of wood so you can run your wheelchair up it. It means designing the kitchen, designing the washroom, designing the apartment to enable people to be able to function properly and normally in their physical settings, and lowering the kitchen sink if necessary, and providing wider doors. The government, public housing, corporations run by the government are the slowest of the slow to accommodate disabled people. But more important than anything else, is the ability of disabled people to travel and to use public transport. If you can't get to a place to work, you'll never be able to earn a living, and you'll be dependent, and you'll have to live on the $800 or $900 a month that the government gives out, measly amounts of money to people who are physically disabled, expecting them unrealistically to live at on such a starvation monthly pension. Physically disabled people want to work according to their ability and according to their skills, but the transportation available to them is a joke. I once fought the Ontario government and the Toronto government to develop Wheel-Trans, which the Toronto Transit Commission now has, and to upgrade the facilities for Wheel-Trans for disabled people. The buses they used to use were old buses, were unsafe buses. They didn't have Velcro belts. The bottoms of those old yellow buses they used 30 years ago were rotted through, and they were rusted, and they had accidents all the time, and disabled people were taking their lives into their own hands every time they went on those Wheel-Trans buses. And the people who were driving them were university students, part-time workers, sometimes working 13, 14, 15 hours a day, not trained properly to run those buses, not trained properly to look after disabled people. I carried on a campaign for improving Wheel-Trans, for getting new buses, for unionizing the workers. And it took 3, 4, 5, 6 years with the help of the disabled, with marches, with demonstrations, with conferences, with press releases. We're finally able to get the City of Toronto to modernize those buses. We're finally able to get them to reduce the cost. It was used to be operated privately by Always. We got a TTC to take it over, and we're able to get the workers there to be unionized, to be trained properly, and to be paid properly, and get proper salaries. And it was a battle that we won, but we only half won it, because the buses still don't show up on time. There's still not enough buses. It becomes almost impossible for disabled people to meet the qualifications to go on Wheel-Trans. It's still a major problem. And how many times do you go to public buildings and see that little note, Wheel-Trans was here, but you were not here? Because people get tired waiting an hour and a half late to pick up a bus, and they find some other way of going home or going to work. Unless you have real universal accessibility to housing, unless you have meaningful facilities for public transport, unless you have proper access to training disabled people, the reality will be that whatever formal equality you have for disabled people, in real life, they will still be treated like second-class citizens. Every government in every election promises, oh, we're going to do something for disabled people. We're going to pass a new act, and new acts have been passed. But without the financial commitment, without the will, those acts end up being ignored or just being words on paper. Disabled people have rights to universal accessibility in every sphere, important social sphere of lives. We are committed to treating them equally, and we should make that goal a reality. No government has given that any kind of meaningful priority. That's what we need, to have real equality and real justice for disabled people. And until we have it, they will not have equality, and they will not have justice. And where there is no justice, there should be no peace.